An alien calling voice made its way through the immense noise in my head. Suddenly the guy saw a stranger towering above him, who was interested in the appearance of another alien from another world. He opened his huge green eyes in bewilderment. Resting his knees on the street paving stones, he peered at the man in amazement, while the blue haze from the movement dissipated around him. Behind us, the buildings of the town were lined up in a row under the reliable protection of the mountains. The stranger scratched the back of his head, wondering how to find out more about the stranger. Finally, he tried to carefully calm the guy down, but absolutely confused, seeing how he begins to take off his t-shirt in a panic. The world where the hero has moved is called Akron. It is there that you can meet beautiful girls, warriors, powerful magicians and strongmen, but not only. In Akron, you will face a horde of demons and monsters, because of which there is a struggle for survival in this world. Aliens from other dimensions often come here, but they begin their journey precisely in this city, the border, Akron. The man asks the guest whether he is strong in magic or martial arts, but he, blushing, shakes his head. The guy is even more perplexed by the new nickname Classless. That's what they called him. Having learned from the newcomer his name, Noah Miller, the man promised to take care of the newcomer, explain where he ended up, and feed him. Noah tearfully thanked his savior. Entering a dark alley, the benefactor asked if the stranger wanted to drink. Hearing agreement, he held out the flask. Then, turning around, he carefully made sure that the guest tasted its contents. Noah threw back his head and began to drink greedily, and then he sharply inflated his cheeks, dangling liquid in them. The next moment, the kindly offered drink poured onto the man's face. Finding himself blinded, he could only curse the guy who laughed at the gullibility of the defeated stranger. Noah recognized the goblin poison of paralysis, and assured that it tingles much stronger in the eyes than on the tongue. The man, roaring in pain, could not believe his ears. The stranger realized that they wanted to deceive him and sell him into slavery. Spitting out the remnants of the poison, Noah listened to the cries of pain and insults in his direction. He sharply dodged a blind blow, confirming that he was far from a novice, and had just been drafted to Akron out of class. The guy's leg shot up and with a sharp blow caught the poisoner's butt. Then Noah's knee ended up right on someone else's chin. He also did not forget to mention during the fight about 13 years of experience in battles. With a sharp movement, Miller pulled out a dagger from his opponent's bosom. The very next moment the tip passed along the man's neck. Noah idly asked if the villain remembered the rules. Akron don't trust anyone. He finished what he started, then turned away from the splashes of blood flying at him, and muttered through his teeth that Akron, the worst world in the universe. 10,000 coins and only one dagger. Noah looked at the trophies he received with disappointment. Thinking that it was not bad anyway, the guy looked at himself sadly. At the beginning, he didn't even think about taking off his clothes. In this way he checked what his body turned out to be like in the new world without scars and mountains of muscles. He found himself in the past when he first appeared in Akron. The thought flashed through Noah's head that the artifact had worked. Being a 27-year-old mercenary of rank C, he lived poorly and earned money for future use. Life passed in search of a solution to the main problem, the inability to achieve fame, but he had neither talents nor noble origin. Seizing every opportunity, the mercenary found an unexplored dungeon. There, having won the battle, he discovered a small chest, which he opened with great hope. But disappointment overtook him when Noah saw only a stone in the chest, the mystery of which he could not understand for a long time. A system notification showed that the homecoming stone had been activated, and its owner would be sent back 13 years in time. Miller recalled that this was the last thing he saw right before his death. Everything indicated that this was the purpose of the stone, to return its owner to the past. Now the young fighter asked the system to show his characteristics. Alas, all acquired skills and abilities were reset. Grabbing his head, Noah could not believe that he had returned to the starting point, and even with the same characteristics, he was stung by the thought of the pointlessness of his return. Fortunately, 13 years of combat experience were not in vain. The most striking events from the past came to mind. You can always take advantage of some extra class privileges. For example, a chiropractor, whose shop, by a fortunate coincidence, was located in front of the guy. Yes, Akron famous for its arrivals from other worlds, magicians, martial arts masters. But the most frequent visitors to these lands are non-class. They can become whatever they want, and even gain the opportunity to gain accelerated growth. But in practice, classless are the very bottom of the food chain. Akron. Noah Miller is one of those who have no abilities, but only a struggle for survival. humiliation, and poverty for 13 years. All that awaited him was an inglorious death. The mercenary did not know what joy and the taste of victory were. But now the local chiropractor, lowering his glasses, asked if the young patient really wanted surgery to improve his skeleton. Noah Miller was unshakable and was willing to do anything to make his life better. The system came alive with glowing signs about upgrading the skeleton to a low-level martial artist, as well as learning the celestial concentration technique. The mercenary clasped his hand with excitement. Finally, he has 2 directions for growth. Previously in Wyoming he did not even imagine such an opportunity, thereby closing the door to fame. Now the new skeleton structure will allow you to easily master martial arts. Noah was promised free services in exchange for spreading the word, but at the cost of incredible pain. It turned out that the prerequisite for skeletal enhancement was to remain unskilled and classless. Miller didn't know about this in the past and missed his chance. The guy convinced himself that this time he would do everything right, because now his characteristics contain data on a huge advantage over an ordinary skeleton, the possibility of quickly mastering the skill of martial arts. The chiropractor will not live long, which means that in the future there will be no such classless ones, only one Noah. The heavenly concentration technique is a basic technique for accumulating spiritual energy. This is the second opportunity for growth. There are many techniques for working with energy. They differ in the level of control over the latter and the speed of concentration. In his previous life, Noah learned the ordinary second-level concentration technique, but only now found out that in the old bookstore Wyoming there is a book about the first-level technique. Fortunately, the second-hand bookseller had no idea about its value, and sold the book for only 40,000 coins. The guy proudly walked forward, triumphantly holding the book in his hand and thinking about the corrected mistakes of the past. 2 out of 3 chances were not missed. The third remained to win a prize in a tournament in the Coliseum, exactly 1 year from now. Since the tournament is only for non-classes, the requirements for participants are low. Noah walked along the road and thought about the upcoming victory. He would devote all his free time to training, but first he would find a job. Stopping in front of a local merchant, the mercenary decided that he would become a monster hunter. The merchant, raising an eyebrow, looked at Noah with a mocking glance and asked what he needed. The guy enthusiastically pointed to the lying armor, while the merchant ironically muttered about the small size of the armor and wanted to take a closer look. Miller, playing along, enthusiastically pointed at various objects on the floor. The merchant, scratching his beard, asked how much money the guy had. Hearing the amount, the man laughed. What else? 60,000 coins, and at least 300,000 for bottles, weapons and armor. Noah cautiously asked if he could take it in installments, but the merchant was unmoved. Suddenly the man perked up when he heard a new proposal. Noah decided that he was ready to part with his clothes for the sake of his dream, and made a tempting offer to the merchant. With his eyes widened, he listened as the guy enthusiastically talked about the technology of sewing his clothes, and about the huge possible revenue for an outfit. The answer was the merchant's loud laughter. It seemed that no one had ever made him laugh like that before. Laughing, he ridiculed Noah for trying to get pity, swearing with a classless tooth that his buyer was still too young. The merchant continued to reproach the guy for cheap tricks. Finally bursting into laughter again, the man appreciated the young man's attempts to bribe him. He then handed the armor to the startled Noah. The merchant said that he respects people who are willing to do anything to survive, and will be glad if his goods help Miller. He chuckled when he heard about his debt of 240,000 coins, and squinting, thanked the man. Finally Noah, dressed in armor, held a heavy spear in his hands and felt the cold steel of new knives behind his back. He did not regret that he spent all his savings and got into debt, because even light armor increases the likelihood of staying alive. The mercenary began to think that in his previous life no one had ever done him such favors. Had luck really begun to favor the young man? But nevertheless it cannot be ruled out that they simply want to profit from him and betray him. It is better to be careful. Noah stood in the middle of the thicket, clutching a spear in his hands. He looked at the sky and remembered how he first came here to hunt in a previous life. An unhappy, frightened boy with a homemade wooden weapon in his hands. How he has changed now, endowed with strength and new skills. Yes, 13 years ago Noah was so pathetic. The system began to play with new notifications. You remembered the techniques: lightning leap, steel breaking skeleton, stonebreaker blow, spirit knocking spear. Suddenly the air became restless and the leaves rustled. The mercenary's gaze caught movement from the side. Having walked quite a bit, he found himself right in front of the spotted prey. The vile green goblin screamed, startled by the unexpected appearance. Holding the handle of the spear in his palm, Noah took aim in a split second, and he sharply pushed the end of the weapon with the other palm of his free hand. The shining and sharp tip of the spear passed through the goblin's mouth, sticking out at the back of his head. Technique: spear knocking out the spirit. First movement, killing shot. The spear, sticking out in the monster's head, whistled through the air, dragging him into the bushes, and in the next moment firmly pinned the goblin to the ground, landing there. Noah clenched his teeth and felt his palm burn. Kill shot is a technique for firing a spear using the left hand. At first it leaves burns on his palms. The guy thought it wouldn't hurt to get calluses. But no pain could overshadow the joy of victory. Maybe he still didn't see the point in this return, but now Noah has a chance for a better life. Meanwhile, somewhere in another world, an unknown young man in red robes was sitting on the floor, meditating, in the lotus position. Suddenly, right at the top of his head, a mysterious blue haze appeared in the air. The very next moment the stranger woke up and found himself in a whirlwind that intended to take him somewhere. A second, and only that same haze remained in the room. Noah Miller, raising his head, looked at the city tavern, which was welcomingly beckoning with the bright light from the windows. The fat-cheeked innkeeper greeted the guy as he walked inside. He beamed with joy when he recognized the stranger. Noah nodded while Hayes, clutching a heavy bag in his hands, he told the man that he had brought him payment for the night. When Will asked how the mercenary would pay, he answered that he would pay with the same thing as always, lowering the bag onto the counter. The bag, or rather the purse, was magical. Miller immediately hid the spear in it. The acquisition did not escape the innkeeper's eye. Noah told about the discount from his merchant, who praised the guest's business acumen, extending his hand to today's currency. The man examined the goblin's teeth and the blood serum lying next to him. Pleased that this would be enough for a couple of days, he assured that the Guild of Magicians would not give the guy even a coin for them. Will praised Noah again, but the guy was confused, asking what was so talented about that. The man told how he was surprised by the out-of-class boy on his doorstep who offered to pay his rent with the fruits of the hunt. He did not expect him to live long. For 2 weeks now he had been regularly receiving his pay after a night hunt. Noah's surprise turned to anger at these words, especially when the innkeeper mentioned the poverty that accompanies those out of class. Hayes continued his speech, but when he compared Noah to a certain Max, the mercenary turned around in the middle of the conversation and walked towards the stairs. Darker than a cloud, he muttered to the indignant innkeeper that he was tired, and went upstairs. Noah clenched his hand into a fist, his nails digging painfully into his palm. Standing on the threshold of his room, the mercenary's head was beating with the thought that talent was not about him, and did not suit him at all. In his previous life, he was just an ordinary C-rank mercenary. Noah Miller, a low-level martial arts practitioner with few skills, not even 5 stars. Heartbreaking spear technique, lightning leap, metallic blood exoskeleton, stonebreaker technique. He learned these techniques in a previous life. But these are just second-level combat techniques. You won't get far with them, because if he comes across someone truly strong, the damage will be felt no heavier than a bird's feather. There was only hope for the first-level technique, the Stonebreaker Strike, and the Celestial Concentration technique. The mercenary, sitting on the bed, continued to clench his fists in impotent anger. All his skills did not provide endless energy. He, getting more and more excited, exhaled loudly. A real fighter needs more complex martial arts techniques. The next day, Noah was called out at the bar. A pretty girl stopped him halfway, asking if he was going hunting. Daughter Will innkeeper, Nikki, stood at the counter, strictly placing her hands on her hips, and wondered why the guy was risking his life in vain. Miller explained with a sigh that for him, an alien, this was the only way to make money. Nikki, wagging her index finger, reminded Noah that he could always look for a regular job. Sighing, she offered to work in the family tavern, especially since Will, her father, spoke well of the guest. The mercenary shook his head. He could neither cook nor clean. The worried girl did not give up trying to convince him, because learning the craft of an innkeeper is not as risky as risking your neck every day while hunting. Noah smiled faintly at his thoughts. He headed towards the door, telling the indignant woman at his disobedience, Nikki, that he'll be back by lunchtime. No, the mercenary has already lived one life as an opportunist, working in a rundown tavern, unable to say no to anyone. Noah then smiled flatteringly at the always dissatisfied owner, trying to save his job. Walking towards the exit, the guy thought that he could live like this. But he would no longer waste his life on this. This time he will do everything to take possession of what made the mercenary envious. Given the chance to start over, Noah Miller is sure to succeed. His attention was drawn to the loud sound of bells, gathering passers-by to the center of the action. The midday bell rang out across Wyoming's main square, and this meant that new aliens would soon appear in this city. A portal appeared near the dried-up fountain, glittering with pale blue flowers. From there appeared a handsome long-haired young man with red eyes and a matching red and black hanbok. As he stood and looked around in surprise, Noah thought that the alien could be his age, studying martial arts. The mercenary examined the young man, confident that the local bandits would immediately notice his behavior. They didn't have to wait long. Two men with a mountain of muscles found themselves next to the young man, holding out the same flask of poison that they treated Noah to on the first day in Akron. Miller stared at them wide-eyed, but the next moment, he shook his head. It didn't concern him. Intending to leave, he turned sharply and slammed his forehead into something hard with all his might. Exclaiming, the guy slowly raised his head, squeaking sorry. He saw a mountain of muscles in front of him. Their owner, a creepy-looking bandit with a scar on his cheek, bared his teeth and said that Noah had broken his collarbone. Without further ado, a fist in a hard leather glove immediately flew into the guy's face. The giant swung with such force that the mercenary was thrown several meters to the side. The couple was quickly surrounded by a crowd of passing residents. Stretching his hands forward, the bandit began to assure passers-by that the impudent man had broken his collarbone and got what he deserved. He narrowed his eyes and said with a smile that he was just teaching a lesson and the boy would pay him compensation. Nothing to look at all. Apparently, such events happened often, because people immediately dispersed. The comrades of the bandit named Ozzy would call out to him, continuing their acquaintance with the alien, and he, approaching the defeated Noah, told them about the broken collarbone. The defeated mercenary realized how unlucky he was. The men were from the same gang, and Ozzy had good fighting skills. The big man's friends laughed, because the short man could only reach Wood's rib, to which he assured with a creepy smile that there was no difference, and that someone else's rib would also be broken. The bandit was a third-class hand-to-hand combat practitioner, but this is what no one knew. Hand-to-hand combat skill is divided into classes, starting with third and ending with the highest master. Being a low-level martial artist, who usually quickly master the necessary skills, the guy himself had not even reached the third grade. Having grouped himself, Noah assessed the enemy hanging over him. He understood that victory alone was not worth waiting for. The locals of Wyoming were indifferent to strangers. The decision came with lightning speed. Miller screamed with all his might, warning the victim about the poison in the flask. He froze, holding the bottle in his hand halfway to his mouth. The mercenary did not know whether his peer would be of any use, but assumed that the young man had been called up from Salinas, and should at least be able to do something. In the ensuing silence, the long-haired stranger poured the contents of the flask onto the ground. The enemy turned to Noah and shamed the guy for his unworthy act, assuring him that there would be buyers for him among the perverted nobility in the city. The bandit, determined not to stop, bent his leg, intending to strike again. The guy had a different opinion. He couldn't leave it like that. The offender should get what he deserved. Noah's first step towards victory was a lightning-fast leap. The mercenary jumped sharply to the side. The advantage of his exoskeleton called metal blood allowed Miller to first stun his opponent, only to fall in the next moment with a powerful elbow strike right into his back. With their mouths agape, the partners in crime collectively called out Ozzy. The mercenary, meanwhile, switched to the stonebreaker technique when the fighter's fists seemed to multiply several times during an attack. The guy jumped back, breathing heavily, to assess the bandit's condition, but he giggled disgustingly, as if all those techniques for him felt like the bites of an ordinary insect. Ozzy would, straightening up and bursting into hoarse laughter, assured that he would not be left with such a fight. Noah, already wounded, now put out his fist, bloody from blows to someone else's chest. Assessing his chances of winning as 0, he was amazed at the bandit's reaction. He clearly knows some kind of defensive techniques. And the rest of the gang, as if just now waking up, decided to flee. Despite the narrow-mindedness of the Wyoming guards, after all, they could still come in response to the noise. Miller did not share their opinion. He let out a scream and became furious, ran towards Ozzy. The victim also perked up. He looked with all his eyes at the unfolding scene. Noah saw someone else's fist aimed at his face getting closer and closer, and realized that he could not win in hand-to-hand combat. His hand reached into the magic bag in his bosom, intending to pull out a spear. But then the unexpected happened. Miller did not have time to take out his weapon when an alien flew up to him and loudly demanded to repeat what the guy shouted to him then. Noah stared in amazement at the grinning stranger next to him. What a bad time. The enemy's fist was already close, and the distracted guy only managed to shout that now was not the time to chat. In response to this, his interlocutor did an incredible thing. He moved his palm to the side and with his fingertips touched the fist that had overtaken them. Everything happened in a split second. Noah, without even taking out his spear, saw would fly away from an invisible blow. The white magical haze from the magical blow gradually dissipated, and the stranger calmly complained that they dared to interrupt him. Like a bandit ball, having fallen, he knocked down his comrades, and now they rested peacefully on the ground, falling on top of each other. A drop of sweat ran down Noah's cheek. He immediately recognized the palm strike with a charge of spiritual energy. And this is not even the second or first class of hand-to-hand combat. Was this handsome young man, Miller's age, drafted just a couple of weeks after him, a master whose rank in the class was one step lower than the highest? The stranger, or rather the small heavenly demon Vash, as the shocked Noah assumed, asked with a polite smile to tell him where he ended up. Here's what Miller knew about the Sky Demon cult. They were members of an unorthodox sect that worshipped power and strength. The strongest among them always becomes the leader, the heavenly demon, and his offspring young leaders. And now, the young man standing in front of the mercenary was none other than the newcomer from Salinas, the young leader, the small heavenly demon, Vash. Noah recognized him. He has master-level techniques. Once in Akron, he soon became famous, the same age as Miller himself, reaching heights as soon as he crossed the threshold anywhere. The mercenary could not believe his eyes. It really was him, the young leader, in person. Later, impressively sitting on the bed at Noah's house, Liam introduced himself to the still stunned owner of the room. He obediently said his name in response, noting in amazement that his guest was 13 years old. He was a year younger than Noah. Pumping his fist, the red-eyed young man looked at Miller with interest and said that he was intrigued by Akron, because this world was completely different from his native one. Vash did not expect that when asked if there was a celestial demon cult here, Noah would answer in the negative. Suddenly the newcomer burst into contagious laughter. Then he sharply raised his head and pierced the mercenary with his gaze. The insinuating voice reminded Noah that it was he who shouted to the demon in the square when he forbade him to drink poisoned water. The mercenary opened his mouth in surprise, not understanding what the master was driving at. Liam laughed again, and suddenly accused the owner of the room of disrespecting himself, because he dared to address the leader on a first-name basis. Noah bowed, answering that he did not know about the status of the young son of the elder heavenly demon. Gritting his teeth, he looked at the floor and thought about how humiliating it was to bow before a 13-year-old boy. There was silence. Vash seemed to be enjoying the spectacle with a satisfied smile on his lips. He pointed his finger at the mercenary, and said that he had watched the fight in the square. Noah heard something he didn't expect. He was shamed and called stupid. The skills acquired with such difficulty, which the guy was so proud of, turned out to be completely worthless in the eyes of the demon. The execution of the techniques was terrifying in its clumsiness. The young leader was perplexed who could teach the unfortunate man to fight so absurdly. From what he heard, Noah began to shake. Veins appeared on his forehead from tension. He asked what Liam was leading to. At first, the mercenary thought that the master was angry, but he stopped smiling and looked seriously at his interlocutor. He extended his hand and said that he would teach Noah martial arts. Like a fish, Miller opened and closed his mouth. Did he really hear it? Will this heavenly demon really give such a gift, and not deceive? Folding his hands on his chest, Vash said that he would take Noah as a student, and he would at least get rid of his clumsiness. And the latter could not believe his ears, and kept asking whether he would really be taught. The demon nodded, but set only one condition to the inspired Miller. With a dull look, the mercenary only squeaked a quiet yes. Which one? Liam solemnly announced to Noah that he should make friends with him. Miller opened his mouth in shock, not making a sound, and the next moment he closed it, slowly lowering his head. Pale and sweating from excitement, he stared at Vash with a silent question in his eyes. Let's fast forward briefly to the master's childhood, when on one of the clear distant days the baby loudly called his father. Smiling toothlessly, the heavenly demon loudly announced that he wanted to make friends with someone. The father was surprised by what he heard, not understanding why his son thought about it. To this, the boy held out a book. It was in it that it was said that no trouble was scary with a friend. Hearing from his father that this was indeed the case, the demon beamed. But only for a second. It turned out that this was the privilege of mere mortals. Flashing his fangs, the leader of the celestial cult Vash menacingly ordered to forget about nonsense. After all, one day his son will become a military leader of hordes of demons. The ruler doesn't need friends, he said, and advised Liam to practice martial arts rather than read all this nonsense. The younger demon squeaked in agreement, jumping at the leader's order. The father watched as his son, furrowing his eyebrows and sniffling resentfully under his breath, ran away. It gave him no pleasure to see his child's sadness, but the man could not help it. Amrit worried a lot about Liam, especially when it came time to train. One day he called together 50 very weak fighters to fight a minor demon. A 10-year-old child dealt with them with ease. It scared even his own father. He just hoped the lot wouldn't fall on Liam. Now 13-year-old Liam stood in front of a man in an unfamiliar world and invited him to be friends. As the heir of the Sky Demon cult, he grew up under relentless attention and great expectations placed on him. And with such responsibility and endless training, there was no time to make friends. Noah wondered why the choice fell not on him. Was the young master really not friends with his peers? But Vash was already extending his hand to shake and smiling sincerely. Then he solemnly appointed Noah Miller as his friend. For a second he imagined himself in his previous body. He is 27. But he has to be friends with a 13-year-old boy. Liam kept his promise and began to teach the mercenary martial arts, namely the Purple Path. The Way of Violet Dawn is an art created by an unorthodox sect of demons. The energy when performing it is purple in color. Noah was surprised. He thought that he would be taught the martial arts of heavenly demons, while the guy addressed the demon with respect, remembering how he was reproached for disrespect. The smile disappeared from Vash's face in 1 second. Leaning closer to Noah, he reminded in an even voice that friends address each other as you. The puzzled mercenary could only stutter and agree with the demon. In response, he shone brighter than the sun. Liam said that he could not teach his friend the way of the heavenly demon. This school of arts was only intended for the heavenly demon and his heirs. The Way of the Violet Dawn is a very good fighting art, he said, and assured that Noah would like it. The training went on as usual. Miller thoughtfully touched the cut on his cheek, stepping on the dead goblin sprawled under him with his right foot. A month has passed since an incredible coincidence of circumstances brought him together with Liam Vash, and he began to teach the mercenary the path of the Violet Dawn. Noah became stronger, and the defeated goblin was not alone. A bunch of his brothers lay in dying poses in a forest clearing. Currently, the mercenary was roughly halfway between second and first-class martial arts proficiency, a huge achievement compared to his previous life. But Noah's opinion was not shared by his teacher. The demon complained, calling him devoid of talents, that the lessons of the great Liam were in vain, and that in a month he could have learned much more. Miller, boiling inside, could not allow himself to express everything he was thinking about the demon. Having retreated, he went to collect all the most valuable things from the goblins. Suddenly the trees cracked and a huge silhouette appeared behind the thick branches. Noah, not believing his eyes, watched as a huge orc rushed towards him. He immediately pointed a spear at the monster, which was still covered in blood from the previous battle. He felt relieved. He was glad that he reacted so quickly to the danger. But where did this orc come from here? Noah glanced to the right to see how many more enemies might be attacking him. But not a single rustle came from the trees in that direction. Looking to the left with only his eyes, he also saw nothing, and there was no one in that part of the forest either. But who knew how insidious orcs are? Did he really come alone? The mercenary swung using technique spear, knocking out the spirit, killing shot. A crimson stream of blood flowed from the wounded monster. The orc, defeated, fell to his knees. Noah, in turn, pulled out the blade of the spear and jumped back. The mercenary smiled boldly, appraising his trophy, and a malicious voice was heard somewhere behind him. Liam, he mocked the pride of killing one orc. Noah knelt down on one knee, looking at the carcass lying on the ground, still surprised by the presence of orcs in these parts. A strange voice was heard from behind. Its owner had probably been watching the battle all this time, and now praised the young man's skills, despite his age. The mercenary turned around and looked at the stranger and asked who he was. The man apologized, clasped his hands in the traditional greeting, and stated his name, Ethan Garcia, known in the capital as the Orchid Sword. Miller thought his sword was too familiar, but he didn't show it, and asked what Ethan wanted from him. The warrior pointed his finger at the dead monster. This orc was not so ordinary. Garcia brought the guy to the main square and introduced him to his company. A man with manners and appearance similar to a monkey, Toby Foster, whose name was Monkey, displeasedly asked his friend why this boy had surrendered to them. Garcia pointed to the silent Noah, assuring that his skills would be useful to them. Another warrior, Black Dagger of Rain Marcus Torres, a gloomy young man in a half-face mask, introduced himself and supported Ethan. A girl with an unusual hairstyle ran up to them to introduce herself, but in a more friendly way. With a beaming smile, it was Jaren, the witch from Abilene High. She eagerly asked Noah what kind of work he would get here. The guy shrugged. He guessed in advance. Ethan said that a tribe of orcs had recently set up camp near the city. Monsters are not afraid of anything. They attack villages and travelers. Gesturing vigorously, Garcia announced a reward of 20 million coins from the Mercenary Guild, which would be received by those who killed the entire tribe, and with trophies the prize would be approximately 35 million coins. Noah asked how the reward would be divided. The man counted him and his team exactly 5 people. The mercenary, tapping his finger on his lips, thought he could get about 7,000 coins. Such an opportunity does not come along often. The only problem is whether these people can be trusted. The thought flashed through my head that this guy, Ethan, was not being too honest with the others. A shadow passed over the young face, but Miller, with the same thoughtfulness in his voice, agreed. The man grabbed him by the shoulders and laughed. He praised Noah for making the right choice, confident that together they would complete this task much faster. The guy dropped his hand from his shoulder and politely thanked Garcia. Then he turned and pointed questioningly at 2 drooping, strong men who were sitting nearby, loaded with huge backpacks. Ethan waved his hand. These were non-class porters, and he also asked Noah where he was from. The guy, watching the unfortunate people towards whom Jaren was walking with a cheerful step, replied that he was from Salinas. When Garcia said that these out-of-class people were to be paid for transporting their equipment, the witch asked one of the porters to buy her some apples, and dropped a few coins into his palm. Ethan indifferently continued to say that those 2 were of no interest. He spoke about them as if they were animals. Just say it, and they will follow you. But for some reason Noah became angry at these words. He nodded when the warrior suggested they set off. And yet something haunted Miller when he looked at the smile of his new acquaintance. Janier got the apple and now chewed the fruit with pleasure as she walked. The whole large company slowly approached the entrance to the forest. Noah asked the monkey how many orcs would be in the camp. He replied that there would be about 50, but perhaps the battle would only be with 30 of them. Orcs are stupid and clumsy creatures, the warrior continued with a grin. This is an easy job, you just need to take them by surprise and wait it out, they will have the money. Ethan, when asked about strategy, suggested splitting into 2 groups. The little warrior, as he called Noah, would go with him. Marcus Torres, Toby Foster and Lady Jaren would go with him, and each group would have a porter with them. Having split up, they lure the orcs out of the camp, in other words, divide and conquer. The witch raised her hand and created a small whirlwind. She explained that she would use wind magic to make their scent spread throughout the forest. Because orcs do not like strangers on their territory, so they will want to deal with uninvited guests. Toby continued, they will walk straight into their ambush, and when they arrive, Jaren will use his combat spells. Ethan was clutching a flare in his hands. They planned to light it to lure the other part of the orcs. The plan, in his opinion, was simple. In this way they would divide the monsters into 2 fronts and deal with them. Noah thought that the plan was not bad, although it was simple. More traps could have been prepared, but there was neither time nor people for this. Garcia, seeing a stick with a skull on top and with scraps of fabric on it, a kind of mark of the location of the orcs, noticed that this was already their territory. The skull glowed ominously with empty eye sockets, grinning numerous fangs to the travelers. Here they separated and wished good luck and a glorious battle to each other. Then Noah, Ethan and the porter continued their journey through the forest, the 3 of them. The guy heard the out-of-class man breathing heavily behind him under a pile of things. They had been walking for half a day. For someone like him it must have been hard. Drops of sweat ran down the porter's face, and his breathing became increasingly heavier. The mercenary stopped and turned around and asked the man's name. He didn't even expect that they would turn to him, and asked again. But still, smiling through force, he said his name, John. Noah became serious, and said that he was not sure whether he could protect him when the battle with the orcs began. The porter stopped in confusion, and Miller gave him a choice: move on or run away. The guy glanced sideways at Ethan walking ahead. He certainly wasn't going to defend the out-of-class guy. He didn't even pay attention to their conversation. John, unable to catch his breath from the heavy walking, croaked that he could not escape. Noah knew firsthand what the guild would do to a man if he tried to escape. In his past life he was beaten so badly for this that he barely came to his senses. The mercenary nodded and advised the man to defend himself by any means. He, surprised by the sudden concern, agreed. Garcia stopped and enthusiastically informed the little warrior that they were there. Fortunately, they did not come across any of the monster patrols. The trio stood in a clearing surrounded by trees. A fence was visible ahead. It was an orc camp. The man took out a flare to lure the orcs, but Noah stopped him. The guy opened his belt pouch. Ethan immediately noticed that the mercenary had a magical, dimensionless pouch. He narrowed his eyes enviously when he heard that Miller got the item, according to him, due to pure luck. Noah took out a tub of water and explained to his surprised companion that it was necessary to knead the mud and cover it with it to mask the smell. Garcia, watching Noah's fuss in the mud, enthusiastically praised the little warrior's knowledge and intelligence. The guy did not respond to the praise, but said that he learned this from his teacher. Then he invited his companion to do the same. For the next few seconds the man, like a crazy pig, obediently rolled around in the mud. It was the porter's turn. Noah made a new batch of camouflage mud for him. Finally, the silence of the forest was broken by the noise and red trail in the air from a signal flare. The orcs, baring their teeth, perked up and began to look around in search of strangers. Sitting down on the ground and bending one knee, Ethan, with an indifferent look, suggested that the little warrior send a porter forward. He explained his tactics this way: it would be more convenient to send an out-of-class to distract the attention of the orcs, while the rest of the group attacks the monsters from behind. The answer to this was a stunned look from the porter and a face darker than a cloud from what Noah heard. Sweating with fear, the man prayed that he would immediately die from the clutches of the monsters, but he assured that this would not happen. Ethan looked carefully at the unfortunate man and insinuatingly whispered that if he did not carry out the order, he would certainly die at the hands of the warrior himself. The man's mouth dropped open in shock as a burst of laughter rang out from the warrior, who assured him that it was just a joke. Noah bit his lip, silently deciding something. He slowly stood up, lowering his head and dangling his right hand, while the guy held his spear tightly with his left. He told the surprised Ethan that if no one objected, he would go first. The corners of the warrior's lips rose slightly. He did not dissuade his partner. 13 huge and armed orcs were moving towards them. Noah did not hesitate, and barely noticed a green carcass among the trees. He immediately used one of the fighting techniques with a spear, aiming at the enemy. The unsuspecting monster opened its mouth wide, watching the tip fly towards it -1. Miller, surrounded by monsters, sharply turned his spear from side to side. And so, when 2 orcs, choking on blood, flew away to the side, there were already 11 of them. Noah seized the moment, and assessed the number of opponents, wondering if the remaining monsters were up to him. But he immediately interrupted himself. There is no need to think like that, he can do them. Unexpected thoughts flashed through his head. Why did he feel sorry for the porter? What was in it for him? How pointless it was to be merciful. Maybe it was sympathy. They are no one to each other, not friends at all, the mercenary thought while he fought with the orcs. However, they are both classless, and that is quite enough. The monsters were momentarily taken aback by the attack coming from such a small opponent. After all, whoever is stronger is the law. Miller rushed forward with his spear at the monsters. This is the rule, very straightforward and cruel. During general training sessions with Liam, he always blamed his student for weakness. Towering over him, the demon ordered him to be grateful for his patience, saying that he needed to remember every word and movement. The master regularly taught how to hold the spear correctly. It was necessary to hit from a distance, so he would become stronger. The blade flashed in front of the orc's face. It was level 3, a soul-crushing spear. Hit! Noah ordered himself and rushed forward, using the necessary technique. Each orc got what he deserved, the wounds from the tip of the spear glowed in their chests. A lightning-fast splitting blow, and now the monsters, not having time to drop their weapons from their paws, scattered in different directions. Ethan struck several more with his sword, jumped high, and struck with lightning speed. Noah noticed out of the corner of his eye that one of the orcs was already bending over the lying porter with a huge club. He, weak and unarmed, covered himself with his hands and let out a heart-rending cry. An instant, and the mercenary's spear pierced the monster's back and passed right through. Covered in dirt, with someone else's blood on his face, Noah held a weapon with an orc impaled on it and looked at the bearer. The team froze in the ensuing silence. Around them lay the bodies of orcs, and in some places their parts. Garcia walked around the clearing and with professional movements cut off the ears of the orcs' heads. A total of 13 killed, he said, throwing the loot into the bag. The warrior thanked Noah, who was still leaning on his knee and holding a stained spear, and also said that he was cutting off the ears of the orcs as evidence. The man assumed that the other group had already dealt with the others, then threw the bag of trophies to the porter, which he almost dropped. The guy looked thoughtfully into the distance, nodding when Ethan suggested finding their companions. John, clutching the bag given to him in his hand, headed out of the forest. Passing by Noah, he whispered with his lips, "Thank you." He looked back and followed the lonely figure. Tired, covered in dirt, the guy stood, not knowing what to think. Toby Foster sat on a stone at the exit of the forest, and could not wait for the trio. Finally, a small team appeared on the horizon. Jaren enthusiastically stuffed her mouth with a bun. The monkey said that everything went well, and they had dealt with the orcs a long time ago. He asked why the little warrior, Ethan, and the porter were all covered in dirt. The man laughed hoarsely, sweating profusely, and replied that everything went like clockwork, especially thanks to the little warrior. Marcus Torres suddenly perked up and listened. Narrowing his eyes, Ethan grinned and said that the real battle for them would begin only now. Noah straightened up, sensing something was wrong. Marcus immediately extended his hand, and something whistled in the air. A second, and a dagger was stuck in Jaren's chest. The girl froze, rounding her green eyes. She only managed to gasp, opening her mouth absurdly, falling to the ground. Time stood still. Toby Foster was still sitting motionless on the stone. He stood up in shock. Behind him Ethan was already unsheathing his sword. Noah threw his spear forward, right next to the man. He, narrowing his eyes, asked unkindly not to interfere. Memories from the past filled his head. The owner shouted at Noah, hurried him and promised to deprive him of payment for disobedience. The guy hurried, scurrying around the square, carrying a huge sack on his back. The mercenary was sweating from the weight and trudged forward, constantly apologizing. Suddenly he saw a crowd, but could not see the reason for the excitement. His overseer shouted again, "Has this out-of-class guy never seen an execution?" Folding his arms across his chest and grinning carelessly, the man said that a particularly dangerous criminal, a mercenary from Salinas, had been brought to the square. The crowd parted and it became visible the guillotine, in which the criminal was already located. According to Noah's owner, he went on the case with his partners, but killed them to collect the reward. He was caught on the spot. Miller looked fearfully at the face of the one whose neck would soon be cut by sharp steel. And now, in the forest, the guy again peered into those same eyes, which were now burning with an insane fire. Ethan, holding the sword in his hand, chuckled. He did not expect such a quick reaction from little Noah. He said that he seemed to know everything in advance, to which Miller grinned. Of course he knew, because he had already seen the traitor in a past life. 13 years have passed, but it is difficult to forget this. For the first time in his life, the young man was present at an execution. The veins on the man's temples trembled. He said that there was nothing to do. He himself saw how the boy fought with the orcs. Preparing to attack, he nevertheless praised Noah, saying that he was a good fighter. And starting to run towards the mercenary, he shouted that he was still stronger. Noah waited. A second-class fighter, he himself is only on the way between third and second, and this is a very strong difference, but don't despair. The out-of-class realized that he was excellent at reading Ethan's movements. Right now he was preparing for a slashing blow. He raised his spear up, deciding to stop the enemy on the approach. The blade almost entered the man's stomach when he got too close. Noah grinned. The experience of his past life and the lessons of the little demon helped him a lot. The warrior managed to dodge the spear and was now standing a few meters away from Noah. The man shouted, asking how long he could hold out, but suddenly croaked without finishing what he said, and blood sprayed from his mouth. Putting his hand to his mouth, he, choking, asked Noah in shock what was happening, and he calmly replied that the poison was to blame. The guy poured a long-acting poison into the mud in which Garcia smeared himself. But the poison itself was not fatal, since it did not enter the stomach. The man clutched his sword fiercely, but his hands were shaking, which meant he couldn't cope even with a weaker opponent. Miller, without letting go of the spear from his hands, inquired about the warrior's further actions, but he suddenly noticed a porter standing to the side. Ethan rushed towards him. Noah continued to stand, not understanding what would happen next. But his opponent figured out how to buy time. He pressed John to him in front and put a sword to his throat. What a low act! The distraught warrior hissed to Noah that if he moved, the porter would die. The guy was dumbfounded. Thoughts were racing in his head about how to help the porter. Garcia, now staring wildly, had previously seen Noah's good attitude towards John, and now felt that he had come across a soft-hearted idiot. Ethan bared his teeth, spitting blood from his mouth to the side. The little warrior would definitely have no choice. Miller still could not understand the enemy's motives. Did he really seriously decide to do this? Does he think he can survive if he takes the porter hostage? Noah slowly stepped forward. In response to this, he was warned that the next step could be fatal for John. But still, he has been a mercenary for so many years, and is the only reason to help John. Just because they are both classless. Garcia, sucking blood from his nose and grinning triumphantly, was sure that luck was on his side. Noah shook his head. This was not the time to argue, especially with such exhaustion after the battle with the orcs. If it weren't for this, the mercenary would have most likely killed Ethan before he even had time to come to his senses. But you can't act with all your might. It could end in tears. Behind, Toby and Marcus were fighting to the death, and since the effect of the poison can end at any moment, after the death of the monkey, Noah will have to fight with two opponents. There was no choice. We had to act now. The porter, sweating profusely, wheezed intensely. The next moment, he sharply moved his leg behind his captor's knee. They both fell onto their backs with the sword still dangerously close to John's neck. Noah, seeing this, reached forward, screaming his name. The porter fell on top of Ethan, who squealed, cursing him, trying to get out. Finally, withdrawing the hand holding the sword, he plunged the sharp blade into the side of the classless one. The warrior's bloodshot eyes looked into the eyes opposite, in which life was slowly fading away. He hissed to the porter that he had to be obedient. Miller walked right up to the lying men. His face darkened with rage. His eyes widened. Garcia begged the little warrior not to do anything stupid. Noah, putting the remaining strength into the blow, sharply lowered the spear straight into the warrior's chest. Toby turned around at the death rattle. He was wounded with a dagger in the shoulder, but Foster defeated his rival Marcus Torres. The little warrior was on his knees, holding a spear tightly in his hands. He looked at the dead porter, a pool of blood slowly flowing from his mouth. Ethan and Marcus are dead. Monkey and Noah received a reward for the orcs from the mercenary guild, and divided the proceeds with trophies between them. Liam beamed when he saw his friend on the doorstep. He had finally arrived. He said offendedly that he was late. Noah nodded, answering that he was at work. The mercenary collapsed on his back on the bed without taking off his boots. Sprawling on the blanket, his thoughts returned to the battlefield. With a little more strength, John could have been saved. Frowning, Noah thought that he definitely didn't want to do in his new life something that he would be ashamed of until his old age. The previously silent demon, like a judge, approached his roommate, as if reading his thoughts. He confidently told Noah that he had killed a man, and when Miller was surprised, the master explained that he smelled blood. The mercenary covered his eyes with the back of his hand and said that he fought with a second-class fighter. He had no choice. Vash sat down next to him on the bed and spoke to Noah again, saying that he was clearly hiding something else. Miller withdrew his hand and looked at his friend without a word. The demon's eyes lit up with a dangerous fire. He demanded to know what he was silent about. The mercenary sat up in bed under the attentive gaze of the leader. He swallowed hard, trying to put a calm expression on his face, and answered the question with a question. What could he be hiding? Noah asked Liam if he really thought a classless fighter couldn't defeat a level 2 fighter. He waved it off. Not at all. With the help of the Path of the Violet Dawn it is possible. But Noah is different. He is special. The heavenly demon knew what he was talking about. Once in Akron, he wandered around Wyoming for a long time, trying to understand this world. Liam was not only in idle places, but tried to visit the dirtiest corners in order to notice all aspects of people's lives. He quickly realized what a classless life was. The boy saw the most outrageous actions of locals who could not, or did not want, to achieve a better position in society. He looked down on them as he passed by, thinking about what nonentities they were. According to Vash, people usually kill insects with ease, while not everyone is able to kill a small animal. To do this, you need to cross a certain line within yourself. Noah, without taking his eyes off the young man's figure, listened to him silently. The master noted that on the first day of his call, the mercenary immediately went into the forest to hunt. Miller immediately objected that there was nothing unusual in this, because otherwise he would not have survived. Liam smiled and said that this makes sense. But why does Noah think that other out-of-class people live like this just because they don't understand it? They understand everything, but do not dare to end someone's life. The demon looked slyly at his friend and folded his arms over his chest. In addition to the fact that Noah is out of class, he is also a teenager. Something doesn't add up here. He objected that it was just an ability mimic, but Liam did not support the game. He caught his roommate in avoiding questions, but these were not all suspicions. Noah has no abilities. This hit Miller's pride worse than a knife. He quickly lay back on the blood and offendedly turned his back to the demon. But he did not give up. He kept saying that even such a glorious teacher as himself is useless if the student cannot master more than a third of the material. But what intrigued the master most was that no more than 3 weeks had passed since Noah had been hunting with a spear, and his skill was already very good. Liam scratched his chin thoughtfully. As a rule, the weakest point of a beginner is a lack of control over internal energy and footwork, but he did not notice such mistakes in Noah. The mercenary once again sat up in bed, while the demon asked how could a person without abilities master a spear so well in just 3 weeks. A shadow seemed to run between him. The demon looked expectantly at Noah, asking who he really was. Noah himself was silent, cracking his knuckles. Finally, he raised his head and in an even voice told his friend that he did not understand what he was talking about. Liam opened his eyes and said insinuatingly that he really didn't like being lied to. The friends silently faced each other again. Noah was the first to break the silence. He carefully said that everyone has personal matters. And is it right to pry into someone else's personal life? Is this really what a friend does? The demon bit his lip and was thinking about something. After a few seconds, he came out of his stupor and joyfully said that since Noah has secrets, it means that he himself has them. Vash put his hand to his chest and said that he could exchange his secret for Miller's secret, but he assured that he did not need other people's secrets. The inspired master was unstoppable. In addition to his secret, he, bending his fingers, promised to teach his friend an incredibly powerful technique, the art of wielding a spear or the art of movement during a fight. You just need to choose. Noah exhaled in disappointment. The evil irony was that he did not have the ability to master the teachings, and did not have the internal energy to fully implement them. Liam, raising one eyebrow in confusion, thought for no more than a second. He nodded without a second thought, and agreed to give the mercenary a quarter of his energy. It wasn't a fair move for Noah. He seemed to tremble all over from what he heard, but the demon simply replied that he was too curious. Being his only friend, Vash must know everything, including what he keeps secret. This is exactly how the demon saw friendship between people. A heavy sigh was heard from the mercenary. Lowering his head, he asked the demon to promise not to kill him for telling the truth. He sincerely did not understand why he would do this to his friends. Liam was delighted, and reaching for the elastic band in his hair, said that he would be the first to tell his secret. A shock of long, jet-black hair spilled over her shoulders. All this time, Vash was a girl. Noah felt as if he had been hit on the head with something heavy. His eyes became the size of 2 coins. His mouth opened so wide that he could swallow a huge pie hole. Winding a strand of hair around her finger, Liam said that this had to be done for the sect, because only a man can become the leader of the heavenly demon sect, and her father said that she should live like a boy. The mercenary could not come to his senses even after the story. The demoness explained that even after she came to this world, she continued to hide. When asked to tell his secret, Noah covered his face with his hands in despair. He needed to collect his thoughts. Before his confession, he muttered that he and his newly made girlfriend needed to move in, but she didn't understand why. Miller, throwing his head back, loudly sucked in air, urging himself to calm down. His long bangs fell into his eyes as he sat up straight in bed. Having looked carefully at the demoness, the guy admitted that he was a returnee. Her eyes widened, but she didn't seem to believe it too much. The silence of the night was shaken by a girl's cry. What kind of nonsense? Liam asked if this means that Noah died and then went back in time. Sitting on different beds, Miller lowered his head, while the demoness reasoned out loud that she believed the guy, and that this situation explained a lot. Raising her finger up, she said that anything could happen in this world. Perhaps if they were in another, it would be difficult to believe the story. Noah watched the girl with a frown. She asked why her friend decided that she would want to kill him. Holding his breath, Miller exhaled and said that although he had incarnated himself as a 14-year-old teenager, his real age was 27 years old. Approaching Vash's face, Noah asked if she was offended that he had not told her his real age, and the girl believed that she was seeing someone of the same age in front of her. She shook her head. Everything turned out differently. Noah looked at the demoness in surprise. She explained why she was not upset. After all, she was the first to approach Noah. Later she offered to teach him martial arts. Well, then she offered to be friends, in which case Miller did not deceive her, he simply agreed. The mercenary was embarrassed by such logic. Liam also said that for her, everything told was not a reason to kill, and even more so, it did not call into question their friendship. The demoness spent 3 weeks next to him. They shared meals together, studied, communicated. This is what real friends do. The girl smiled and expressed the hope that Noah was satisfied with this answer. He opened his mouth in surprise, intending to say something, and he immediately pressed his lips into a thin line. There was no need to say anything out loud. Everything was already clear. Thank you. This word hung palpably in the air. It seemed as if an adult man, with his head bowed in shame, was sitting in front of a girl wise beyond her years, and before that no one had ever spoken to him so sincerely. Liam herself ruined the moment by noting that she sympathized with how small the level that Noah had achieved in his past life was. Devastated by the sincere conversation, the mercenary stupidly looked at one point. At that moment the demoness jumped up. Smiling widely, she solemnly said that right now she was ready to transfer a quarter of her internal energy to her friend. Noah raised his head sharply. Had he really heard it? It was worth explaining how serious it was. So, chi energy. It is accumulated by a martial artist for use in battle, and it is this that gives superpowers. With the help of concentration techniques, martial artists gradually increase their energy potential, and work on this throughout their lives, achieving incredible potential over the years. This is the basis of the power of a fighter. Both warriors moved to the same bed. Noah took off his top of clothes, and now sat with his bare torso with his back to Liam, and she put her palm to his back, and thus created a connection between them. The transfer of energy potential is a rare phenomenon. The demoness noticed how dirty the guy's blood vessels were. Moving her hand higher, she lightly squeezed the mercenary's neck with 2 fingers, which frightened Noah and said that at the age of 14 it was too late to start learning martial arts, and how long he would retain it depended only on himself. Approaching Miller's ear, Liam quietly told her numb friend that everything was ready. She could transfer her chi energy to him, and he should use the path of the violet dawn. Returning his palm to the fighter's back, everything around was illuminated with red light. Noah's insides seemed to be compressed into one whole, and he himself gritted his teeth from the sudden jolt. Miller looked at his palm, which was glowing with a purple light. The master's hoarse voice sounded over her ear, and she asked how things were going. A purple haze enveloped the guy's entire body. Liam's head fell weakly onto his shoulder. An alien chi was glowing in Noah's stomach. If this is only a quarter of its energy, then how insignificant was what he was able to accumulate over his past life. Drops of sweat flowed down their tense faces. The demoness asked how much energy the mercenary had retained. He answered that half, to which the girl assured that this was not a reason for frustration, because all the rest of the energy would be absorbed along its meridians. Before falling on her back, Vash managed to tell Noah that he should use the path of the violet dawn, and then, through the guy's worried cry, she added that this way he could take all this energy into his body. Miller excitedly bent over the demoness, but she, breathing heavily, assured that it was just fatigue. Noah was silent, looking at his exhausted friend, quietly asked her why do this for his sake. Looking at the ceiling, the girl answered, because they are friends. She asked him not to worry, that nothing was required from Miller, and she just wanted to do it just for her own sake. Slowly raising her finger up, she said that she would now teach Noah one more technique. As promised, the technique of wielding a spear, to which he pulled back in surprise. Was there really a second gift waiting for him? The technique of the Spear King, the bearer of the great spear of the ninth heaven, but with the abilities of a mercenary it will be difficult for him to master it, so the demoness will try to make the technique more primitive. Tiredly rolling her eyes, in response to another cry, she repeated that she was doing this only for herself, and to be more precise, for her first friend in her life, and now she will not allow Noah to die this time, having lived only 13 years. Miller's voice shook with emotion as he said her name. I tried to bow, but immediately received a blow to the jaw from a lying girl. Friends don't bow to each other. Rubbing the bruised area, Noah asked why she got that idea. What's wrong with bowing? The next moment something truly unexpected happened. Liam's hand reached for the guy's neck. She replied that she didn't like to allow such things to happen. Now they were both lying on the pillows next to each other. Noah stared in shock at the demoness, whose hand was still resting on his neck. She suggested with a grin that they should do something more pleasant. The guy seemed paralyzed by what he heard. It seemed that he would lose consciousness from the awkwardness of the situation. But Vash, looking into his eyes, decided to take pity on her friend. She asked to tell Noah about her past life, about what she knew about her then. At that time, the mercenary was barely making ends meet and heard about the heir to the leader of the heavenly cult only through rumors. They said that he was at the very top of Salinas, incomparable in strength. The demoness was delighted and said that it was so, nothing surprising, but Noah asked why she left the city only a month after her appearance. Having heard that nothing was known about her for 3 years, Liam chuckled and continued the story herself. Surely she was traveling then. What she always missed most was freedom. This freedom never existed, always under supervision and within the rules set by the cult leader. Liam looked carefully at Miller. It was then that she met him, her first friend, when at that period of her life she was called into this world. Noah turned to the demoness in bewilderment, but she turned on her back and said that she would leave in a month. But before that, the girl firmly decided to enjoy freedom and this new world. Vash turned to Noah again, propping herself up on her elbow. When in a month he mastered the ninth heaven spear technique, she would leave, as she had done in her previous life. A smile touched her lips. The demoness asked how Noah himself wanted to spend his life. Miller felt uneasy. How would he live his new life? The guy plunged into not the most pleasant memories of his past life. This life was bitter. Broken here he crawls along the floor of the inn, and washes the floors to the screams of the owner. Trembling with horror, he tries to track down his prey, standing with a pathetic club in his hands. She also carries huge bags and someone's things on her thin body. Even at 27 years old, a tall and stately man could not change anything in his life when he wanted to. A weak, worthless, dead insect buried somewhere in the ground. Liam looked at him interestedly, resting her cheek on her hand. But Noah replied that he wanted to live better than last time. Narrowing her eyes, the girl raised one eyebrow. She was not satisfied with the answer. The demoness asked if Noah had any goal. He frowned, not knowing what to answer. Vash smiled and advised him to think about it, and then tell her. She beamed and exclaimed joyfully that she had completely forgotten to ask Noah about his past life. Miller was embarrassed, scratching the back of his head, said that there was nothing special to tell, affectionately called Liam a hooligan when she made fun of him, that she had expected such an answer. Noah thought about his past life. Did he have at least one friend? And immediately answered himself that he definitely did not. Just as he became the first friend in his life of Liam Vash, a girl with a difficult fate who so longed for freedom, it was she who became Noah's first friend in his life, giving him joy and hope for a better future. They spent that long night lying very close to each other on the bed, talking about everything in the world. A month passed, and the friends went to the edge of the city to conduct their last training before separation. Liam beckoned Noah to her, ready to fight. It was time to check how much he had learned in a month. Noah, confidently holding the spear, fixed his gaze on the girl. The time had already come for her departure. After this training she would go wandering. Leaning his body back, he said that he was ready to show the master all his strength. The demoness was surprised for a second. Did he really imagine it differently? Did he think that with his abilities it was possible to fight carelessly? Noah, screaming loudly, ran at that very second, thrusting his spear forward. At the same time, Liam didn't even move. She put her palm forward and showed 2 fingers. The student was given the opportunity to use 20 movements, no more. As he ran, Miller thought about how he could use them more effectively. Previously, Vash had figured out how to simplify the Ninth Heaven Spear technique to Noah's level. She solemnly announced that she called it Improved Ninth Heaven Spear Technique, Noah Miller Style. Noah widened his eyes at this. Was the fighting style really named after him? The girl waved her hair and explained that if she had adapted the technique for him, then why not add the mercenary's name to it? Although Noah did not express great joy at such generosity, it was still stupid to argue. In this improved technique of the Spear of the Ninth Heaven, the Demoness combined his technique with some elements of the soul-crushing spear technique. The guy decided for a second whether to use this technique first. So, Movement 1, Improved Technique of the Spear of the Ninth Heaven, Noah Miller Style. Liam's response was a heartbreaking, deadly blow. Without moving, she pointed the palm of her right hand at the approaching spear. A wave of his hand to the left, and the weapon turned in the direction it was pointed to. 1. The Demoness, as promised, counted Noah's movements. 2. With her usual grace, Liam threw her head back slightly, and the sharp blade flashed directly above her head. Noah took aim and threw his spear forward. Movement 2. Lightning Splitting Strike. The spear, like an arrow, flew towards the heavenly Demoness. 3. Vash raised her palm up again as the weapon flew past her. She said with a smile that compared to the beginning of his training, the guy found the parry block strike movement much easier. Liam switched weapons with Noah. Parry reflects the enemy's attack with an external movement. A block is the result of a downward spinning motion that blocks an opponent's weapon. The girl, with a spear in her hands, showed how to do it correctly, and then a blow, an attack on the enemy. She approached the guy, whose eye was already twitching from tension, and explained that these were the basics of wielding a spear, which he should have known a long time ago. Noah knew, but he taught them on his own, by trial and error. The Demoness ordered him not to forget to practice them every day until it became a habit. Miller smiled and thanked his teacher. 4. The girl parried another blow from the spear. 5. And the next one passed her by. 6. The spear whizzed past, and Liam advised Noah to work his back to increase the power of the blow. He gathered his strength and strengthened his military techniques, using the path of the Violet Dawn. 7. The Demoness praised the guy. The tip of the spear flew dangerously close to her hand. Noah clenched his teeth. Damn, does she really have such a huge superiority? He had already grown to the second class of martial arts thanks to the chi energy practices that this girl taught him, and she parries his blows with only her right hand. Her level is the highest martial artist. Liam looked closely at her student and asked if he accidentally gave up, because he looked hesitant. Noah lowered his head, gathering his strength. The next moment, the tip of the spear was right in front of the Demoness' face. Did she really think that he would give up? A circle of flashes darted around the heavenly Demoness, and she looked through them into Noah's eyes. The same flashes were reflected in the mercenary's bloodshot eyes, and barely noticeable veins appeared on his forehead. Liam didn't move a single muscle on her face. She collected and deflected the attack with her palm. Last movement, the girl waved her hand. The tip of the spear stopped right in front of her eyes. A slight smile touched Vash's lips. At the same moment, Noah discovered emptiness in front of him, but what about his technique? A quiet clap, and the feeling of someone's presence behind you. The Demoness held the tip of the spear, appearing right behind the mercenary. Both froze. This meant only one thing: lost. Liam touched her friend on the shoulder and said that he was doing a good job, but Miller, embarrassed, asked not to console him, because the master blocked everything with ease, with one hand. Noah was breathing heavily, but despite the limited capabilities of his chi, the girl was sure that he was born for martial arts, and also had good reactions. Noah was able to feel her appear from behind, even though he couldn't even strike. And when you feel something you can't see, that in itself can be called a superpower. One day Miller will take this to such a level that it will give him a significant advantage over others. Vash folded her arms across her chest and set the deadline: in 10 years. Answering Noah's question why exactly 10, the Demoness thought about how suspiciously easy their training had been. She was pleased with her student's achievements. He demonstrated everything he had been taught, and she was especially impressed with the last movement. Noah blinked in surprise when Liam asked him to meet in 10 years. The young leader asked Noah if he had decided on his goal, but he shook his head. Vash pointed to herself. If so, then she would become his target. Suddenly the guy's hands began to tremble. A person needs a goal, a person without a goal, as if without a helmsman. The Demoness smiled affectionately at Noah. He should set himself the goal of defeating her in battle in 10 years. to which the mercenary barely audibly muttered that he could not. The despair that Miller had been holding back suddenly overflowed. He lowered his head and screamed in shame. Even if he made her his goal, he still couldn't become like her.